We'll begin after the fire trucks. Mr. Clerk, this is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee meeting that was scheduled several weeks ago that we postponed. And it's also at 5:30 we'll convene a joint meeting of the School Finance Subcommittee with the City Council Finance Subcommittee. But Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll for the Council Finance?
Elliott,
Here.
Councilor Broderick.
Here.
Councilor Mendonça.
Here.
Three present.
Three present. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Manager, in addition to the FY11 budget, I know you have some information to share with us, but there were two motions, one by Councilor Murphy on the snow and ice deficit, as well as one by Councilor Dakota on legacy costs, which we have received reports. So without any further ado, I know we have a lot of items on the agenda. There'll be a lot of questions. So if I can go right to you, Mr. Manager, for presentation, I presume. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have for you tonight is a quick PowerPoint presentation regarding the fiscal year 11 budget, and then we'll be happy to talk in detail about the snow, and I think we'll be addressing the snow and ice issue within this, and then we're certainly prepared to discuss the legacy cost issue that Councilor Dakota spoke of. With this PowerPoint that we have, we'd like to give you some sense of where we are with fiscal year 11. We're coming up, as you know, to that time of year when we have to submit everything to the state to have all of our numbers approved. And oftentimes this is the point in the year where certain adjustments are made. I know that the city in the past has had an issue of, sometimes having to make major adjustments with its fiscal year budget at this point in time. But I'm happy to say that, again, this year, as I think the last several years, we've just had some minor changes that we have to make to sort of tweak the budget to make the numbers work in line with the revenues that we have available to us. And one of the issues certainly that we had this year, as we'll get into, is that in the fiscal year 11 budget that was approved by the City Council back in late May, early June, we had anticipated a snow and ice deficit of about $1.3 million. As you know, when we closed out the books in late June 30th, we were able to identify savings in various departments across city government that we're able to recapture that money and put it towards the snow and ice deficit, thereby freeing that money up for us. Now that did several things, as you'll see when we get into the presentation, and maybe I should just go into that, is that it enabled us to deal with the issue of the police contract that was recently settled. It also allowed us to avoid the change in the pension. If you recall, we were looking at the necessity of, and it wasn't something that we wanted necessarily to do, but we didn't see much option. Given the tight finances that we were looking at back in May, we were looking at the possibility of extending out the funding schedule for our pension, which ties, I guess, into the legacy cost issue, extending that out to the year 2040. There were some arguments of the value of doing that in terms of smoothing out sort of the market changes that have occurred, but we'd like to stick to the notion of paying down that unfunded liability as quickly as possible. Along those lines, if I could just make a comment regarding the pension, I think it's important for people to remember why we have an unfunded liability in our pension system. We get a lot of questions raised to us or comments raised to us that the pension system for our municipal employees is overly generous, perhaps, or that we have to appropriate a substantial sum of money to provide pensions to the current employees. In fact, that's not why the pension costs are as high as they are. Right now, new employees coming on pay approximately 11% of their salary to the pension system, which, in the private sector, of course, you pay about 6% of your salary to Social Security, and your employer pays a similar amount. I think it's a little bit below, a little bit above. In Massachusetts, the retirement system, it's designed so that you essentially pay for your pension. The reason our pension costs are so high is because the retirees that we currently have, in many cases, were only paying 5%. They were paying under the Social Security contribution for their pension. If you go way back, they were paying even less than that. So the unfunded liability we have is because of the existing retirees, not the current employees that will at some point in time retire. The current retirees paid substantially less than was needed to fund their own pensions. So that's what we're dealing with on that front. But let me go through the where we are. In terms of an outline, we have the 2011 results, including the enterprise fund updates, and then the recap tax rate action items that need to be taken by the administration at our request to the City Council. We have, in terms of the first quarter update, we've provided you with a full report in your packet, covering the general fund, water, parking, and wastewater. So it covers the general fund as well as our three enterprises. We don't include the, if you will, the fourth enterprise, which is the Songus Arena, because as you know, the only thing we're really covering there is the debt associated with that. It's about $320,000, which we pretty much pay for with the money that are now receiving for the Lasher, and then we have to come up with a little bit of additional money each year until that's finally paid off. In terms of the general fund, which of course is what we're mostly concerned with because that's the largest segment, our taxes and state aid are mostly on target. We're creeping towards getting that $1.7 million in new growth that we had anticipated back when we did the budget. It's been a bit of a challenge this year, but the assessors are working hard to get us as close to that as possible. I think they're just under it right now, but they're waiting for some of the TIF-related developments to sort of finalize some of those numbers. State aid, there were some minor modifications when the budget was finally passed, but again, we were able to absorb those within the fiscal year 11 budget. Local receipts, actually, which is another one of our funding sources, is very strong. That includes the miscellaneous receipts, the court fines, the interest. At this point, the only concern we really have is on trash. The solid waste receipts are not quite as strong as we would like, but that's something that changes as we go through the year, as we pick up the amount that we receive for the bags, the excess bags, the funding that we get for that, and it may be that the receipts may not be quite as high as we expect, but we may do a little bit better in terms of the actual tonnage that we're generating, and so that will be a wash. The expenses, as you can see from the report, are well under control, so we're not too worried about most of those expenses. The exception, of course, as is pointed out in the slide, is workers' compensation. We are getting more injuries on the job, and so that's again, we're only 3 months into the fiscal year with this report, so we still have 3 quarters to go, and we're hopeful that we can knock that down. The grant that Mike Herbert recently, the data analyst recently received for safety training, should go a long way towards helping us. That's been very successful in other communities to do that type of safety training. That should go a long way towards helping us reduce some of those costs. I also met yesterday with Ralph Snow, our new Assistant City Manager for Public Works, and of course Mr. Snow comes from a background in the military where safety is of course a paramount concern, and one of his immediate observations was the lack of a safety program within his area, although I will say Ed Patnod and Ed Flynn, who have been sort of filling in parts of the whole public works structure, have come up with some very good ideas over the last couple of months to improve that. So I think we can make some real headway there. The other concerns that we have are delay in the streetlight purchase and the elections payroll, but again, we're confident we can deal with those problems through departmental savings as we move forward throughout the fiscal year. Water enterprise, the first enterprise we want to talk to, all revenue is holding to the budget projections, but we definitely, as we identified back in the spring, we do need to look at a rate increase. That's an area that, as you may recall, we just put into an enterprise about 3 years ago. And so we're now fully loading that enterprise. We're putting all of our costs into that in terms of, not only we're putting the payroll and all of the expenses as well as the overhead costs that go with that, including insurances, workers' compensation, retirement costs, health insurance costs. That's fully loaded into the enterprise now so that it works as an enterprise is intended to do, and that is have all the costs built in. The expenses are under control, but this chart gives you some sense of what happens with our water enterprise. As you can see right now in fiscal year 2011, the bar graph at the bottom was showing a small shortfall in 2011 without a rate increase. And then you can see, because we've been drawing off of that fund balance, you can see that the expenses over time are tracking upwards, which you would expect. Water is particularly challenging for us because of the chemical costs that we have to incur to deal with the water. But you can also see that given those costs and then looking at the revenue that we're picking up based upon how much we anticipate water we anticipate selling, there is a gap there. And so that fund balance goes increasingly into the red from 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, to the point that in 2015, absent an adjustment in the rate, we're down at about $14 million in the red, and that's obviously a problem for us. It's a problem in the immediate sense that the Department of Revenue is being much more strict with their enterprise funds across the state, enterprise funds of communities, and whatever we don't pick up, you can't really carry a deficit. Whatever you have as a deficit, you have to carry in your tax rate. And so that will cut into our taxes, or resulting in either increasing those taxes or having to make further cuts in our departmental spending. So we did contemplate going all the way back to the spring, an imbalance in 2011. The causes for this are just the general inflation. I mentioned the chemical costs. It also includes the health insurance costs, which continue to be a budget buster, and of course that's a topic for conversation a little bit later tonight, I believe, as well as something that the council has certainly been aware of. Pension costs, again, these are tied to the employees that have retired from the city that come out of the water department, as well as the pay increases that have been negotiated and put into place. We also, of course, as you know, have made, this is an area of our infrastructure that we're very sensitive to making sure that it's in full working order. The importance of drinking water and the importance of water for fire protection requires us to have a system that is fully operational and redundant. This was a problem, as you recall, back in the summer. The city of Boston and many of the communities around the city of Boston were subjected to over a week of a lack of water, drinking water. So it's just highlighting the fact that you need to have that system in place. City of Cambridge has its own system, and while every community around Boston, around Cambridge was without water, the city of Cambridge had plenty. And they weren't subjected to the same issues that couldn't certainly cause some health problems. Our situation is even more sensitive because I indicated that we need redundant systems. We only had, up until recently, we only had one pipe that came in from the Merrimack River. If that had ever been damaged in any way, or there'd been a leak, there would not have been water coming into the city. Likewise, the need for that water tank up on Christian Hill highlights the importance of, as we all know, of water for fire protection. So what we're looking at is the necessity of a 24.3% increase to carry the fund until 2013. I think we'd be satisfied with a 24% increase, but that would handle this situation for us. I might also add that it's in line with what other communities have been forced to look at. Our surrounding communities, Tewksbury, Billerica, Dracut, have all been looking at similar types of increases, and it will result in an average household increase of about $49 per year, moving us up from $200 to $249, which is still lower than approximately 220, 230 other municipalities in the state. We have a map that we can show you that shows that there are very few communities throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that provide water as cheaply as the city of Lowell. And I think that's a credit to the work that's been done by our water department, as well as the efforts to hold down costs. Simultaneously, it could indicate that we need to put more money into our system, but we're trying to do the best we can with keeping those rates where they are, or as close to as possible. Updating the forecast along those lines, now another graph, you can see that with this rate increase, this proposed rate increase, you'll have a situation where you actually have revenues and expenditures meeting in 2011. Revenues will actually exceed expenditures in 2012, thereby producing a little bit of a surplus in 2012, but that's immediately wiped out in 2013 when you start to see those expenses above revenues in 2013, and we go back into a situation where we're running a negative fund balance. Obviously, we are working to try to minimize expenses, maximize revenues. To that end, of course, we're putting in a new metering system for our commercial buildings, which are big users, particularly the institutional users like the hospitals and the university, the community college, all these users that don't pay property taxes. We do anticipate those new meters will produce new revenue for us. It's not picked up in this forecast, and that may help us moving forward to either minimize any future rate increases, as well as maybe perhaps delay, although I certainly don't recommend that. In fact, I think we're, if I may, from an editorial standpoint, I think we're far better off making much smaller increases on a regular basis than making the types of increases we're talking about. It's much more manageable that way, and much less of a burden on the taxpayers and the ratepayers. In terms of our parking enterprise, our revenue, and again, on the water, we'll be coming to the City Council tonight in a public hearing for looking at those rate increases. We'll make this presentation again to the entire council, as well as provide you with some additional information to answer any of your questions. Parking enterprise, revenue is $105,000 ahead. 105,000. Garages are 25,000 ahead, meters are 70,000 ahead, and ticketing is 10,000 ahead. So we're doing well in terms of revenue, and all expenses are under control. So you can see on this one, what's changed is that we had a strong opening fund balance. We've increased our revenue estimates for 2011 through 2015. What's remained the same is the small structural budget imbalance, but this combined has allowed us to delay the increase in rates until 2013, maybe 2014. This, of course, is good news. We had thought that we would have to go up more. We would have to go up in parking this year. I know that was talked about in the spring, but all these numbers indicate to us that we're getting a lot of usage out there and in our parking, and we think we can delay that. Again, I think it may be advisable for us to look at this in terms of the future to make smaller increases. Parking's a little bit more difficult. It's hard to add a penny onto the rate. So it becomes a little bit more problematic for us. But you can see here that the gap between revenues and expenditures is small, that runs across the entire 5 years. But our fund balance is there in 2011. It drops in 12, disappears in 13, pretty much, and then starts going into the negative in 14 and 15. But again, we're doing things with advertising. We're doing things with new contracts, with new developments that are coming in to use existing spaces. So we're doing our best to hold down costs and drive up revenues, and I think that's this is really indicative of our success in doing that. Wastewater, we're already in revenue $500,000 ahead of budget. You may have heard from Mark Young that we're bringing in more hauled waste from outside the city. We're getting revenue from this, so that's a new revenue. We've also increased assessments to the towns based upon some of the costs regarding operation. We are, and this doesn't even include this, we are currently in negotiations with both Tewksbury and Dracut to talk about new intermunicipal agreements. Chelmsford follows a couple years from now, but we are looking to increase the amount that the towns pay to the city. All expenses are under control there. What has changed that allows us now to hold off on proposing a rate increase is, again, the strong 2010 opening fund balance, the increased revenue that we've talked about, the assumption for the intermunicipal agreement modifications, some of those assumptions. Debt service has been spread out by the Water Pollution Abatement Trust, so that has reduced some of our costs in the short term and spread them out over a longer term, but at least it has reduced some of those costs in the near term. What has remained the same, again, is the structural imbalance that exists within the budget, and you'll see that again in the chart that we show. That revenues are well below expenditures, but we have a substantial fund balance there that we will work down from 2011, 2012. Again, I prefer to make smaller increases than larger increases, but I know that the council doesn't always have the appetite to take on those types of increases, particularly during these tough times. So we may want to look at that a year from now instead. But again, we're doing quite a bit here in terms of savings in energy, savings in operational costs, and then at the same time, and using all grant funds that we can get, stimulus monies we certainly use. But then on the revenue side, we're looking for additional revenues wherever we can. So, what needs to be done at this point? First off, what gave us the flexibility to come before you and not have to make many changes? The elimination of the snow and ice deficit freed up that $1.3 million, which we were able to put now towards the $1 million to the schools. That was either going to come from, in this way, reducing the snow and ice deficit that we had, that we were carrying on the budget, and now being able to put that to the schools. Or our other option was looking to the retirement board to extend out the pension funding schedule to 2040, which we prefer not to do. So that eliminating the snow and ice deficit was very important to us. We also have been very conservative in our estimates of local receipts. That is really something that is important to both Mr. Moses and I as we do the budget each year, so that we have some play when we get into the November-December timeframe, and that has given us flexibility as well. We've already funded the patrolman's contract. That was done at the last meeting. The last items that remain are the school transfer, that $1 million that we said we would be transferring over to the schools, and some miscellaneous supplemental appropriations that are spelled out in your council packet. And that's it for 2011. And I believe I hit upon the snow and ice deficit question. I touched upon the legacy cost question, but I'll be happy to go into that in more detail. We talked about the pension assessment and why there is a pension assessment, and how we're trying to work that down. We're now working that down. Instead of 2030, it's 2034, but that's better than going to 2040. And as we get improvements on our investments in the retirement fund, that will allow us to back that up from 2034 back to 2030. 33, 32, 31, 30, so that's paid off sooner. The other large unfunded liability that we have out there that is a legacy cost, and we have it for discussion a little bit later again, is the issue of the other post-employment benefits, health insurance. Right now, the actuarial study that's been done for post-employment benefits or health insurance for retirees is $433 million. That's calculated based upon the current retirees and future retirees, what their health care costs are going to be, and then filling those positions, filling of those positions. So that's a big nut. That was something that never used to be carried on the books. It was GASB 45 that required us to now include that in our audit, and we're not required to fund that in any way. There isn't a requirement under state law to necessarily come up with that $433 million yet, but that's coming down the road in all likelihood. I was reading today about another community in another state that did have to, in fact, increase its health insurance budget by, I believe it was $3 or $4 million, just to cover and they're a much smaller community, just post-employment benefits. So what we've done with health insurance in terms of requiring new retirees to go into Medicare is a start, but we really need to bring those costs under control in the long run.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manager. If there's no objection from the members of the committee, I'd actually like to just defer to makers of both motions to see if they have any questions on either A, the snow and ice deficit, or legacy costs. They've been patient, and they filed their motions, and we're just getting it, so if there's no objection. Council Murphy, you have any questions on snow and ice deficit?
I know it was pretty much covered by the presentation.
Okay.
The only comment I could make to a non-comment is what we did do this year, and I know this is something Councilor Murphy was his concerns about in the past, is to get a closer to the real cost of snow and ice operations in the budget. So that's hard to do in the short term. Go right up to the amount that you spend, and you don't want to go all the way up in all likelihood, because you want that flexibility in case it's a mild winter. But this year we increased the snow and ice budget last year. We increased it in 2011, and our projections show us continuing to increase that up to get closer to the real costs. That's the better action to be taking, and we are trying to do that. But I know that was a concern of Councilor Murphy when he first came on as a councilor, and we're trying to address that.
All set. I just had one question, Mr. Manager, on the snow and ice deficit, and I appreciate the fact that we take not free cash, but unexpended funds and maybe revenue that's not estimated or projected. My understanding is that when there was a snow and ice deficit, say 1.3 million, that goes outside of the levy and has to be raised on the recap sheet. So when we said there are savings, how do you factor that into the budget? Is it still above and beyond the 2.5 levy? Excuse me.
We built our fiscal 2011 budget around the fact that we had $1.3 million less to spend. So we did that. We appropriated those expenditures, and now we have, in 2011, $1.3 million of flexibility where we can fund other things without affecting the taxes.
Thank you. Councilor Dakota, did you have any other questions on the motion on legacy costs?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the information. I do have a couple questions about the 2034 payoff date. I'm assuming that's a break-even date. So the 11% that the employees are paying now, in 2034, will that completely cover their pensions?
We'll probably never entirely cover it. It should be reduced substantially. But certainly there's always the potential for people who become disabled on the job, and the 11% that they've put in may not cover their pension, their disability pension moving forward. That's a possibility. There may be some other the police and fire currently are allowed to retire at 55 at 80%. The 11% is really geared more towards the ordinary retirement age of 65. I know the one thing that the state is looking at is actually reducing the 11%. There's some talk of reducing the 11% down to a number like 10, thereabouts, and instead extending out the year of retirement from, instead of 65, pushing it out to 67 or 69, similar to what Social Security is looking at doing. But that is down the road for them to figure that out. But I don't think you'll ever come a time when it will be zero.
Okay.
But I think that certainly by 2034, the unfunded liability will be paid off, hopefully sooner than that, and we'll be able to have those savings. Now that will be, we've talked about this, and I don't expect that either Tom or I will be here in 2034. I may, but what we're anticipating is that in 2034, then there'll be an opening to start funding the health insurance. That will give us some flexibility to do that, but obviously those costs come well before then.
At what point is the employee vested in their pension, or does it happen automatically?
They become vested after 10 years.
And what happens to money paid in to their pension if they don't stay for 10 years?
They can cash that,
They
they can
cash
take
that
that
out.
out, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I think they're required to, aren't
They're
they?
required to
Right.
cash that out. Okay. And the 2034 date does not include the health insurance?
No,
Okay.
no, that's just retire, that's just, and I think our unfunded liability right now is about 150 million, thereabouts. Looking at Cheryl and Tom, about 150 million for the unemployment,
I think so.
pension.
I've actually have the exact number in the report.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, but the health is the big one at 433.
Okay. And we continue talking about this over the years?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you just explain real briefly, also, Counselor? Just real briefly, the advantage of not going to 2040, where the governor signed the bill, the municipal relief bill, allowing communities to do that, because I think it's important to note to people watching or to taxpayers that last year the appropriation, I want to say, was it 16 million, around there, that the taxpayers had to pay the retirement system as part of that unfunded liability. So would it not be more advantageous to go to 2040 during these fiscal times where our investments probably aren't, exceeding the margin that we're projecting? Or I really just want to know what.
Right. There's a couple of drawbacks, and maybe Tom and Cheryl want to jump in here as well. The one that jumps out to me is, one, you'd be pushing those costs off onto future generations, which is somewhat problematic. Obviously it's not entirely problematic because we're going off to 2034. We're not going we aren't staying right at 2030. We're buying a little bit of flexibility there. We do want to try to eliminate those legacy costs as quickly as we can. The other, and related to that, is our bond rating. This was a question, in fact, that both Moody's and S&P asked us about, was whether we were going to take advantage of that. And at the time, we indicated that we were leaning towards it, but we hadn't made a final decision. That was when we talked to them back in the summer. And that, of course, is a concern to them, that you're pushing those costs on, and they prefer, obviously, that they not do that. And maybe Tom will.
There's one more aspect of it, too. Extending the funding schedule out to the outer limits is kind of using your last tool in your tool bag, and you want to keep that in reserve in case something happens. But more particularly, part of the pension legislation that was approved now prevents us from actually lowering our assessment. So if, for example, extending to 2040 would result in a lower pension assessment now because we're financing it over a longer period, we wouldn't even be allowed to do that. So there are some other limitations, practical limitations, based on the current legislation.
And I'm glad Tom mentioned the last tool in the toolbox, because I could just see myself sitting here 6 months from now saying we're going to go out to 2040, and then you could play back this tape of why I said not to do it. But down the road, who knows what's going to happen? We may need to do it, but
I guess one report we did receive, I think it was last week, from PARAC, and I did notice on one of the schedules that one significant cost in my mind is the early retirement incentives to the tune of almost $650,000. How long do we have to carry that early retirement? And I know there were a couple of them, and I didn't vote for them, but how long are we carrying at least the 650?
There are two, but the larger of the two goes out another 10 years.
Okay. All right, thanks. I know we have to move on, so that's very helpful, so thank you. Any other general comments on the FY11, Councilor Broderick, and then I know Councilman Mendonça, Councilor Mercia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, quick question on the wastewater forecast. It looks like, and again, we're going off a chart, so I know it's not exact, but from 2011, FY211, to FY 215, we're looking at an increase of $10+ million maybe in expenses. Could we get, and I'm not asking for this information right now, we're talking about not increasing rates incrementally, but waiting. And if we could get some information on what the impact will be, if we have to cover a $12 million spread, it looks like it's going from somewhere around, 15, 17, maybe 17 to 27. It's hard to tell. A $10 million spread, how much is that going to mean we have to increase over 5 years? And if we're waiting to, year 2 or 3 to really clobber people, should we look at doing it incrementally? And just in terms of, for discussion purposes, I know things are tough right now, and any increase is painful, but just for informational purposes at least.
I just like everyone to know that the spreadsheet that chart is based off of does contain what-if capabilities on rate increases. And the administration has been working with Mark Young and CDM to go over various scenarios. A lot of it depends on how fast the work that's currently being done on the plant and in the streets takes place. So there are some moving parts and variables, but we are actively looking at a number of different scenarios right now with the idea of trying to smooth out that transition.
It is primarily, as you would assume, it's primarily debt service. It's capital improvements, the upgrade, the rebuild of the plant, the CSO, and I will tell you that I have a meeting, in fact, with EPA coming up. There's more CSO work coming, and it's going to continue to drive those costs up. But I agree, I think a smaller increase over a period of time, and perhaps that would be another worthwhile to do some work on that, come up with some scenarios, and have another finance subcommittee meeting on that issue.
Okay, and also I know there was a motion, I think by Councilman Donser, regarding a capital plan that's on the for the finance subcommittee. Do we have?
It's nearing completion.
Okay.
We did it a couple of years ago, and it was in need of upgrade. Of course, we delayed it last year because of the financial issues in 2009. But it's the big. I will tell you, the big priority this year for us is the DPW equipment. That's a real problem for us, that some of that equipment is 20 and 40 years old. So that's what's going to be number one on our priority list for the capital plan. But I know Tom has been working on that with the DPW staff, and of course with our new director. That should be able to speed up, and we'll be able to get that to you very quickly.
Thank you.
When that plan comes in, I know that we went out for long-term borrowing a number of years ago for some equipment. It'd be helpful to see what we got and what we need. I don't doubt that that equipment is aged, but it'd be helpful. Councilman Donser, then Councilman Mercia.
Yes, I do appreciate the new projections. It seems to be a bit rosier than the previous ones, and that although there'll still be increases in the future for rates, it just won't be nearly as high. And as I was looking at this, I mean, in the water and the wastewater, it seems like the pressure is coming from debt service.
Right.
Because we have increases coming in both of those that at this point we've taken out the debt. We're going to have to repay it.
Right.
There's not much we can do about that. And in the case of wastewater, we're going up more than, I'm not sure the percentage, but 75, somewhere between 75 and 100% in 2012. And that's a huge increase to absorb. I'm hoping that your negotiations with the towns will bring them to at least what's costing us for our city residents. I'm not sure where they are at the moment, but they certainly have to share a bigger part of the burden in this, so that maybe going forward we won't have such a difference between our revenues and our expenses, so that we won't require such a huge rate increase there.
If I might suggest, it would maybe useful to have an executive session meeting in the future with Mark Young and with the attorney that we've brought on to work on this, to bring the council up to speed on those negotiations.
Yeah, a good point. So we can discuss it then. And just, I, as you said, would rather have smaller increases over time than have a 25% increase at some point. And it seems like in 2012, we're going to have to do something about the wastewater, at least. It seems like parking is now under control. It just if we had a little more revenue, it would balance out.
Yep.
And the wastewater, or rather the water is not that far off now with the new revenues that it couldn't be managed, maybe with controlling expenses, that we could bring them both back in line, or maybe there's additional revenues from selling water to other.
Yeah, I tried to
Other
sell
stuff.
water to North Chelmsford, but they didn't want to bite. They wanted to build their own plant. It cost about $8 million. But we have a chart here, in fact, that we could show when we get into the water rate discussion that indicates that if our rates went up just about 1.68% per year, we would stay steady. And that's certainly something that's, we can talk about at some point, too.
Because at some point, we can't fund these without taking it from real estate taxes.
That-
So at some point, that's what will happen. If we're not getting it from the rates,
Right.
and this deficit occurs, it's going to have to come out of real estate taxes, and we certainly want to avoid that.
Right.
Thank you.
Council Marcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the city manager. Mr. Manager, let's go over this very briefly. In fiscal year 10, we had $1.3 million in the snow and ice account. How this is a deficit that we're paying out?
In fiscal year 10, we budgeted, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, about $600,000.
Okay.
And we ended up spending, about $2 million. So we had a shortfall of $1.3 million. So when you look back at your budget, it was voted back in May, it showed that we were saying we have to fund a deficit of $1.3 million. When we closed the books on June 30th, we had a little money here, a little money here, a little money here. We collapsed them all together and brought it to the council, and you transferred it over into the snow and ice account, eliminating that deficit.
So then how are we able today to be taking it out and paying like $1 million to the school department for that transfer?
Because if you look at the budget, that was shown as an expense, but we eliminated that expense in the budget by doing the budget transfer back in July, which now means that transfer isn't needed. That deficit is no longer in existence.
So you put all that overage into the snow and ice account deficit.
Right.
And then we have an overage, and that's where you're going with it.
Right.
Now, let me say this. When I get a bill at home for my water bill, it's water, trash, and sewer, right?
Correct.
So how do they divvy that money up when I pay my bill and everybody does? And we're $500,000 ahead in the wastewater. So how do you say, let's say I pay $125. I'm not paying my water bill, I'm paying my water, sewer, trash. How does the wastewater enterprise fund have an overage where the others don't? That's what I want to know.
Okay.
How do you know what to give to who?
Okay,
here?
first of all, your bill that goes out, you're paying with one check. That check is split up. The water goes to the water fund, the trash fee comes to the general fund, and the sewer goes to the wastewater fund. Now, a separate item, just because wastewater is $500,000 above budget in their revenues in the first quarter of 2011, which is a very good thing, it doesn't mean that they're going to cover enough money through rates to cover their expenses. They're still running at a deficit and eating up their fund balance because they don't have enough revenue. Fortunately, their fund balance is great enough to carry them for this year and next year.
All right.
So there's two different issues there.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this question.
Okay.
I read where the city anticipates a sizable increase to the stabilization account once our free cash is certified at the end of the year.
Correct.
What is that sizable increase that we're talking about?
Well, we don't have a free cash number yet, but we're hopeful that it's a sizable amount, and if it is, then we'll be able to transfer.
Well, what is it if it's
We don't
sizable?
know. We don't know.
Well, how can you even label it sizable if you don't even know?
It's a subjective term. We're just not sure yet what it would be, and I'd be hesitant to
Now,
say at this point.
we do have a good bond rating, don't we?
Yes, A1.
And we brought up that stabilization account from 30,000 to 500,000, right?
Correct.
So and that didn't happen that long ago, did it?
About a year ago.
So then how did we get a good bond rating when we only had $30,000 in that stabilization account? How did that happen? Who performed that miracle?
Well, that would be me. That's
amazing.
It's when you go through a bond rating bond rating visit, what you do is you highlight the strengths that the city has, and the city has some tremendous strengths in terms of our financial policies, our financial management systems. I think it has. I know that it has tremendous strength in our financial management team. We also play off our economic development, where we see projects continuing to move forward. With regards to our finances, what helps our bond rating is the fact that if you recall, back in 2006, the city was downgraded, received a downgrade, and we had that negative $2.2 million of free cash that year. We have gone back. We actually went into the black because of the 9C cuts. We slipped a little bit into the red, but we're showing progress in terms of our fund balance, in terms of our free cash number. We don't have as much as we'd like. We don't have the stabilization fund that we'd like, but we're making the right progress. And so they've pretty much, our bond rating has stayed about the same, but they removed the negative outlook, is what they've done, and then they made an adjustment on our bond rating because they've recalibrated their ratings. But it's the positive things that have happened, like the change in our financial condition, the financial policies, the financial management, the economic development. What hurts us very bluntly is our demographics. There's no way around that. We're a city, and we're not Wellesley. So that will prevent us from ever becoming a AAA community, but that's okay because we'd rather be Lowell. But what we need to do is we need to build up more in reserves, and we think if we build up more in reserves, we'd probably look at an upgrade in the near future because we have all those other things going for us. We also point to the $4.2 million in the Section 17 account. And we make an argument that we have the excess levy capacity of $5 million that could be used if we needed it.
Can I just ask one last question, please? I know we're on a tight schedule here. All those all those towns that tie into our water system, are they all paying the same rate? Like Chelmsford, Tewksbury, they're all paying the same rate that we pay?
The standard that's used is basically set forth by the EPA, which funded the construction of the plant, and now we're into a point where we have a little bit more we think we have a little bit more flexibility there. They pay for the cost of the operation of the plant and the maintenance of the lines that continue out to their communities.
They're all paying the same.
Right.
Chelmsford,
What they
Tewksbury?
don't pay is they pay a lower rate compared to the residents of the city. If you looked at it on a gallon to gallon, because the city's rate, what the residents pay, also includes the maintenance of the pipes that are in the streets specifically for the residents.
Are the cities and towns with a contract did we vote and put them on a contract? So let's say that tonight the water rate went up. Does it apply?
Yes.
Is it applicable to everyone?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. When that rate goes up for sewer, when that rate goes up for water, then we make an adjustment on what the towns around us pay. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Sorry.
No, you're welcome. Thank you, Council Mercy. Council Martin, and then we'll move into our second part.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two issues. One is about the proposal for the increase in the water rates. So, Mr. Manager, under this proposal, with the average bill, you say would go up to from $200 to $250 or $249. Councilor Mercier raised a good point. Everybody pays, their water, their sewer, and their trash all on one bill. So my question is, what portion of that is the sewer? No?
It all goes to water.
It all goes to water.
The $49 increase will go to the just to water.
Right, but the check I write, that 49 is going to be allocated to water, but some of the rest of it goes to the current average.
I think it's hard to tell because each household is different, but probably 60% no, excuse me, 30% is water, 70% is sewer. That's not counting the trash.
Right, okay.
The sewer's about twice as much as the water.
If you take the $125 off of your amount, that's the trash amount, and then whatever's left, 70% is wastewater, 30% is.
All right. Okay, so I'm trying to do it like, I think I pay about $500 a year. So 125 of that is trash.
Right.
And of the remaining 375, 60% or so, or 60 to 70% is the sewer bill?
It could be, yeah. It's hard, if you have a water
Right, I
sprinkler
understand
system outside,
If there's a separate meter for the
it's a
sprinkler,
separate
right,
meter, and you
right.
don't
but-
get charged sewer, so it's hard to make a blanket statement.
Right. And again, right.
But the sewer portion is higher than the water.
Yes,
And that portion is not going to be affected
no.
by this. It's just so the part that's being impacted is the lowest portion of the bill.
Right. So in your case, if it's 500, so you take off the 125, you're down at 375. It sounds to me that you have a lower than average water bill. Then you will see less than $49
Right.
per year.
I don't see how that could be, but I'll figure it out.
Perhaps the kids don't take showers as much as they.
The amount of time, I have teenagers, they're in the shower all the time. All right, but I think that helps the average person relate, what this increase means to them. They're going to think, what they write for a check every quarter. This is a quarterly bill, not a monthly bill.
Correct.
And what this extra is going to be. So thank you, that helps clarify it for me and hopefully for others. The other point I wanted to raise was the whole notion about the unfunded pension liability. And I don't have a question so much as a comment. And I think, people get nervous that, you have this unfunded liability out there. But I think for me, the bigger point is we do have a plan to get there. It's imposed by the state that this is an actuarially sound plan to meet our fully funded pension liability. So as much as that may be uncomfortable, at least we have a plan to get where we need to be. We don't have that for the health costs. No. The accounting boards and things have imposed these standards on us for pension costs, and we're dealing with them, and we have dealt with them, and we have a plan to get there. The health costs are just a free-for-all right now. Is that fair to say? I mean,
Well, yes and no. Yes, and we don't, as you say, in the retirement, it's a state-imposed requirement that we have to be funded by. They've allowed you to extend out to 2040, but, that's up from 2028, and they bumped it to 2030. And it's all based upon regular actuarial studies and then adjustments that are made that PARAC requires. Under the health, you're right, there is no state requirement that we do anything, but it sits on our books. And down the road, it's a cost that it hangs out there and is a problem because it needs to be addressed at some point because those bills will come due. And the issue is that as with health insurance, it's going to continue to grow so that it's going to eat a larger and larger and larger portion of the municipal budget. And this is what communities are already finding, and states are finding. So what we are doing is obviously we're trying to do things to bring those costs under control. And that's kind of where we're at right now. The City Council did adopt Section 18A that requires all new retirees must go into Medicare. That we haven't seen the result of that yet in the new actuarial study for the under GASB 45. So that 433 may knock down by some amount, 30 million, 50 million, 70 million, hard to say right now. But it's still a big nut out there that's hanging.
So the GASB 45 requires us to account for that.
The GASB 45 requires us to account for it, to do the actuarial study, and to carry it on our audit, on our financial statements. But there's no state requirement here in Massachusetts yet that requires us to start putting money aside for that. Some communities, I think there's 2 communities in the state that have started to do that, but it's very small amounts. I want to say that I did it, the other town, where we set aside, I think, $50,000. It was nothing. It's
Right.
it's huge.
But that day could come.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and, at the time when we do have to start,
Yes,
funding for that.
that's
And
correct.
That's, I think, the scarier thought, because it's unknown at this, well, it's not unknown, but it's not funded.
Well, the issue is, it is known because of the actuarial study, but it's scary because it's out there and there isn't yet a funding source to do that. And what we're basically doing is we're saying, and this is the reason, communities, municipalities, or governmental organizations have not done any, had not previously estimated or come up with a number for what that is, and they weren't taking corrective actions or any type of actions to bring those costs under control. And so it was this liability that was out there that's going to eventually going to sneak up on everyone, and cause havoc. Now we see what the cost is, we know what it is, but what governments have done is they've incurred this liability and they've passed it on. I mean, that $433 million has to be paid by our children and our grandchildren, and that's going to cut into our ability to provide basic governmental services in the future, which is why we have to act now to bring those costs under control and take the necessary actions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Council Caulfield, and then we'll go into the school committee meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I know we have a public hearing on the increase in the water, and I'll keep my comments low-key. I'll just have more discussion after the public hearing. But, Mr. Manager, how much money do you anticipate in raising with this 24% increase?
This year, it'll be about 900,000.
900,000?
Yeah.
And that's how much the enterprise fund is lacking, $900,000?
Yes.
Okay. I did a little bit of homework on this issue. There's 25,000 residential homes in the city. If every one of those homes paid $36, it amounts to $900,000. That's not including the Lowell School Department, UMass Lowell, Middlesex Community College, the Lowell Housing Authority, the nonprofits, and all the businesses in the city. That's as much as I'm going to say on that issue. I'll have more to say after the public hearing.
If I could respond, the rate increase will only cover half the year.
The rate increase will only cover what?
It will only cover half the year.
Half the year.
Right, just 6 months. Right,
But you're going to raise $900,000.
correct.
You're going to raise more than that. That's as much as I'll say.
Okay, well, we do have a public hearing coming up on the water rates, so I'm sure that discussion will continue as well. So if there's no other questions on the items before us, then I'd like to invite members of the school committee, and Mr. Clerk, we can initiate the second part of the joint finance subcommittee with the school department and the city council. Thank you. While we're getting settled in, Mr. Clerk, could you please call the roll? Because I know we're going to have a lengthy discussion on this as well.
Councilor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Broderick.
Here.
Councilor Mendonça.
Here.
Committee Person Doherty.
Here.
School Committee Person Leahy.
Here.
School Committee Person Leary.
Here.
6 present.
6 present, thank you. We're meeting as a result of a motion by Councilor Broderick that the school committee and the city council finance subcommittee meet periodically to discuss financial issues affecting both governing bodies. And I think at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the chairman of the school finance subcommittee, Mr. School Committeeman Leahy, to have a discussion about FY 2012, correct?
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Councilor Elliott, thank you very much for taking the time, city administration as well as the city council. If Mr. Lang can, we have a brief, just an outline of what we're planning for as of December of 2010. If Mr. Lang can give that information out so everybody can have something they can look at. What we're doing, as many of you may be aware, we're looking at a potential deficit anywhere ranging from $9 to $9.5 million for next year. And in an effort to prepare for that, what the school committee has already completed is taking stimulus money equal $4.6 million, thank you, $4.6 million, and have rolled it over for next year to make up a large part of that deficit. What we're doing now, I guess, is really the remainder. How do we attack that problem going forward? Does everybody have a chance to get this sheet? I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if Mr. Lang, if you can kind of walk us through this, if that's would be okay, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Just to give you a sense of what I presented to the school committee the end of this past summer and into the fall. Again, very early on, we're not going to have solid figures until winter or springtime, but just to outlay some general information we do have about our budget. The current budget for this year for the schools operating-wise is $135 million, and it's comprised of 5 different revenue sources. So the primary revenue source is Chapter 78 at $114 million, and this is the second year of us receiving ARA stimulus money to offset our local budget. So we have 3 offsets there: the 2.2 in general ARA SFSF, 1.2 in ARA IDEA funds, 889 in Title I funds, and then a cash contribution from the city of $16.6 million to give us our total operating budget for the year. The biggest issue that we're dealing with right now, just as we start to forecast for July 1st, is really looking at losing the 3 sources of stimulus money. It was money that was earmarked and needs to be spent in fiscal 10 and fiscal 11. So we know right off the top for next year, if you look at the box, we're losing $6.4 million worth of funding. Again, and those numbers just come right down from the top: 2.2 million in SFSF, 1.2 in IDEA, 889 in Title I. And you see that as an offset on the left and the right. So if you follow the IDEA fund across, instead of 1.2, it's really 2.4. When the school district received the funding, half of the funding was eligible to be used for what the DOE termed recovery funds, so we could use that to pay for existing positions in the school department to help as a budget offset. And half of the, at least half of the funds had to go toward new programming initiatives. You couldn't supplant existing programs. So we actually, over the last 2 years, have built a significant number of special ed and other regular education programs, added a number of positions and whatnot. But next year, we're going to see the net effect of actually having to pick up both of those funding sources. So our deficit just on the ARA funding is $6.4 million from next year. And then we know we'll be dealing with at least $3 million just in general carrying costs. And again, very early on, but these are just some numbers I've plugged in. As far as health insurance increases, we really have no idea at this point what that would be. Assuming, on a low 5% to 10%, you're looking at anywhere from $1 million to $2 million in health insurance costs. The only contractual increases we have at this point are our step and lane increases in our contracts. We don't have any actually contracts in place for July 1st, 2011. Typically, we've been seeing a trend in special ed tuition costs going up. We've done a very good job of maintaining programs in the district, but we still have a number of students that have to be sent to out-of-district placements each year, and that number is anticipated to increase again. And the state has leveled in both fiscal 10 and fiscal 11 the state circuit breaker funding. We don't anticipate that going up again in fiscal 11. If it did, it would be great, but early on at this point, we're just assuming they're going to level fund that at about 30% of the allocation from the prior year. And then our budget for this year, fiscal 11, was actually built on us rolling over $511,203 in money that we'd set aside for contract negotiations that once settled we had as a surplus. So we actually have that building into our budget for fiscal 11. So we're not going to have that offset going into fiscal 12. So that's another shortfall for us. So we're looking, that's where we come up with the $9.5 million figure, and to put a little asterisk on there, and that assumes level funding, both in Chapter 78, local contribution, and across the board level funding. If obviously funds aren't level funded, the situation becomes worse. We did receive a grant, the Education Jobs Bill, that can be spent between fiscal 11 and fiscal year 12, and it was our recommendation with the administration and the school committee adopted to hold that money and actually spend that money in fiscal 12 to help with the budget offset. So the net increase of that grant was $4.8 million. So we do have that $4.8 million to help as an offset in fiscal 12. So assuming the level funding scenario, and let's just roll it up to $10 million, half of that deficit is solved, and we're looking at a $5 million hole. Still significant and still assuming level funding, but at this point in the game, that's about the best we have to deal with, and that's what we're working under.
Just real quick, just to kind of like put a discussion in context, what I think the chairman of Councilor Elliott and I would like to do is have this as an opening discussion, just a boilerplate, a beginning point of where we think we're going to be landing next year if all things pan out even. What the school committee has done, working with the city council thus far, we have saved energy costs from our last budget in a tone of like around $1 million. The city has taken over the energy budget for the school department in an effort to manage that efficiently. As Mr. Lang articulated, the school committee voted to roll over essentially $4.8 million of the stimulus for next year's budget. So if we do hit a $9.5 million, you would deduct the 4.8, so it's around $5 million in that range. Areas that we continue to struggle with, and we work with the city administration and others, are pretty obvious. The healthcare increases. Again, 5% is kind of the average cost of annual medical. I think the city is averaging just actual dollars for our employees. The extra 10% is in case you get a blip in terms of those costs, and or trying to rebuild up our reserves, which I think the council has worked and the city administration has worked pretty diligently on. We're working in concert with the city administration in that effort. In addition, other areas where we're challenged that we haven't broke out yet, but we will as we go into our discussions next year, we're having significant increases in costs relative to special education. And unfortunately, we're also having significant decreases in the funding of special education outplacement costs, or what the education lingo is, circuit breaker funds. Our reimbursement rates used to be at 70%. They're now down around 38% and potentially could go less. And that does have a dramatic effect on the overall budget. A large piece of that, if not all the piece of the $6.4 million ERA funding went to build programs to help reduce costs in special education. So we have saved significant costs. However, unfortunately, with diagnoses such as autism on the rise and the number of students that are enrolling at the Lowell Public Schools with that diagnosis and others, we're seeing a major challenge that we're right now being overrun with. Although I have to say our folks have done a significant job trying to keep the cost in-house, because once you go outside outplacement, it costs a lot more money. Again, I didn't tend to have like an hour-long dialogue, but I think it's important that we begin telling you exactly what we're faced with, areas where we've cooperated in the past, areas where we may have to cooperate going forward. The school department is one of your best assets in the city. And as city councilors, you are charged, as the school committee is, really to ensure that we have a high-quality education. So working together in that effort and with the state delegation, I think we'll be able to achieve our mutual goal of having a solid education for our students at a dollar value that taxpayer can be proud of. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I turn it over to you for further dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council Broderick, maker of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I thank you for the information. This is, I think, a good starting point, and now that we've got the first quarter, I think we had a good review earlier from the city side, and it's important to get these numbers to see what we're looking at. We're going to have some tough votes coming up, health insurance negotiations and things that we're going to discuss a little bit later, and this is all going to be some pretty painful stuff, for the city and for everyone involved. So I think it's important that we also see the other side of the, I think this is our biggest asset, and we want to keep it an asset, not a liability, is our education. We promoted this going from, pre-K to a PhD, and I think that we want to make sure that it's quality, and we need to work together to make sure we preserve that as best we can. And I appreciate these numbers and a sense of where the schools are at with the funding and anticipation. And as we go forward, I think it's important to touch base and see where, any change in numbers and what we're doing, Mr. Manager, on our side in anticipation of, cuts or increases in our level funding, whatever we think we're going to have to do or can do. And to give us an idea ahead of time, rather than we all come in when it's 85 degrees out and we're beating on a budget here, and everybody wants more money and it's difficult. It helps, I think, for me as a city councilor, not involved in the operations on the school side, as the school committee members are in the administration, to get an idea of what these cuts really mean as well, because we're responsible for funding it. We don't decide where the money gets spent, but in effect, the cuts can have significant impacts, in the classrooms, and I think that that's what we all want to do, is try and maintain the best quality education we can. And I think that this is a good, base starting point here to build from, and any input the manager has from our numbers would be helpful. Thank you.
Councilman Dodson.
I do appreciate having this dialogue and understanding better what the challenges are on the school department side. A couple of things that I'd like to see going forward that I think would help us on the council side as well is what's happening to enrollment going forward. What's the projection? Are we looking at an increased enrollment, in which case most likely will increase the city's costs in order to maintain 100% net school spending, which I certainly would support doing. I'd like to keep that level of effort on the city side. And so I think the enrollments are going to be important to track and understand whether they're going up or down. Are we going to increase our costs or lower them on a per student basis anyway? The other thing that concerns me is this actual funding that you have, which is going to help you get through FY 2012, but they are one-time funds. And I'm very concerned that by building a budget, an operational budget, and maybe you can use these funds for things that are not necessarily operational, but that's for the school committee to deal with, if it is at all used for operational costs, then the following year you'll have an automatic structural deficit that we'll have to make up somewhere along the way. And so that's another point that we need to understand. And as you move forward and make your plans for funding in the FY 2012, to maybe help us understand just how much of that will be a structural deficit moving forward that we'll have to deal with at some point. And that'll be my comment. I know we're running low on time, so I yield my back to the chair.
Oh, we're doing good on time, actually. So, school committee person Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak to the issue of enrollment. I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but obviously we're tracking that very closely, and we have been looking at enrollment trends over the last few years. But when my colleague on the council mentioned enrollment, the first thing that came to my mind is what we've seen in the last 2 years in terms of the enrollment of our refugees coming into the city. It's been unlike what had happened maybe since the 70s and 80s when we had the Cambodian population coming in, because we've got refugees coming in from Iraq, Burma, Ghana, hundreds of students at all different ages. I believe the number right now is 200. We're expecting more before December. And as we consider ourselves a gateway city, we welcome the newcomers, we welcome the diversity. But as you can imagine, students coming from war-torn countries who've lived in refugee camps for years, if not their whole lives, and their parents for decades, they come in with a great deal of need. And we're seeing that as a burden on the school system. It is our responsibility to, educate these children and help those families. But so that's also something I would like to see included in updated reports that we provide to the council, not only in terms of our general enrollment trends, but what we're seeing with these newcomers coming into the city and into our schools, because it's a challenge for us. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Manager, did you want to speak to some of these issues?
If I could, and I'll be very brief with regards to the looking at the city's finances, city as a whole. And I do think this is very good information to get this early on, so we can start having these discussions, because it is going to be, by all accounts, 2012 was going to be a very challenging year, and all indications are that that is the case. I do think that several things jump out at me, and one is in terms of the state aid, and the superintendent and I have had some communications regarding this, and I think we're trying to work out some people coming in to talk to us about. The superintendent's spoken to the executive director of the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, which does quite a bit of work on this. It's unclear. The state's financial condition has improved. It was a $2.5 billion deficit. They're now looking at a $1.5 billion deficit that I've heard. So that thing has improved, but they're still looking at potential local aid cuts of 5 to 10%. And so that's a challenge to the schools, and it's a challenge to the rest of city government. So we're not going to know on that until probably January, but we need to have that in the back of our minds, and I know we're trying to do something with Mike Widmer coming in sometime in December. Health insurance costs, again, continue to be an issue. It's 5 to 10% is certainly what we've been, we ran 10% this year. Last year was 12. I think the year before that it was 15. It's a budget buster. It continues to be a budget buster, and we're working to bring those costs under control, but it certainly has an impact. We're running out of money this year for the police department. We've been depending, similar to the schools, depending upon stimulus money. We had stimulus money that paid for our police, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to be able to move those, maintain the police force at the current levels, and continue to do business as usual. And then the last point I would make is that the forecast that we've been running to try to get a handle on next fiscal year, this year is, as you know, we came up with $1 million for the schools to help close the gap. We had a discussion on that earlier, and we have a vote tonight to transfer that money over to the schools, but we had a discussion earlier with the Finance Subcommittee regarding how we're funding that, and it's eliminating the snow and ice deficit that we had. So it's effectively one-time money that we have, that we've been able to move that over. The question is how we're going to be able to do, I know that that's included in your projections here, how we're going to be able to do that next year. So it's another challenge. It's all these challenges in revenues and challenges in fixed costs, whether it be health insurance or in our case, pensions, in your case, special needs students, all of these things adding up. So it is going to be very difficult. I am happy that we have been able to get the schools into compliance with minimum net school spending. We've actually exceeded that for the first time in 17 years. So I think that's a feather in our cap for the school department and the city that we've been able to do that. But certainly 2012 does look like it's going to be a very, very difficult year.
Thank you.
First, just before I forget, I just want to acknowledge that Committee Man Conway and Committee Woman Laraba are also in attendance here, and I think just to echo, and I won't speak any more tonight, but we're really looking at reorganization of our school department to provide services to our students and to help our staff provide those services from things that lots of other school systems as well as other departments have never looked at before. And I won't bother getting into detail now what we have done, but we have made significant reorganizations, and we will be making more reorganizations that will change and will impact our employees' employment. And it's serious issues. We take it seriously. We appreciate you taking the time to work with us on this, because none of our departments, be it police, water, sewer, schools, move in isolation. We're one city. So I really appreciate the efforts. Thank you.
Council Caulfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank both subcommittees for convening this meeting. I think it's very, very important. And I want to compliment the superintendent and the school committee for conserving that $4.8 million. I know you were under a lot of pressure to rehire, bring people back to work, but it was only a move on futility, because you would have to end up laying those people off again. And I think that was very, very wise for you to do. I just want to pick up what the manager indicated earlier. During the governor's debates, it was constantly brought up that the state is $2 billion in deficit. And the local aid Chapter 70 money is $114,495,000. That is not in concrete. I mean, we don't know what lies in the future. And heaven forbid that we do have some cuts in local aid. It won't affect Chapter 70 money. The most important asset we have in this city or any town is the children, and we must educate them to the best of our ability. And but I want to compliment both subcommittees for convening this meeting, the superintendent and the school committee for having wise and prudent actions. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, concerns? Thank you, Mr. Leary, members of the subcommittee. We should do this on a regular basis. The more information that we do get out, this is very helpful to me, Mr. Lang and Madam Superintendent, as we move forward, and as we will all be on the watch for local aid figures. And I think the chairman of the school committee did indicate, there have been savings in many areas on both sides. Energy savings, reorganizing, combining positions, and unfortunately that's not going to be good enough, and we have to continue to go back to the drawing board, continue to look at new ways of saving. Undoubtedly, this will be, in my opinion, one of the greatest challenges that we will face in decades, this fiscal budget. The scenario does look pretty bleak, unfortunately. And, whether it's structural deficits that we've been carrying from year to year, we've been, begging, borrow, stealing anywhere we can. And in my opinion, we have weathered the storm pretty well. And I think it's, under leadership of both the manager and the superintendent. How we make it through this year, I don't know. I don't think any of us know. But these meetings certainly are a good beginning. And I just had one question to Mr. Lang. Mr. Lang, in the spreadsheet that you provided us, the 9.5 less the 4.8, that does not include any contract costs. None of your contracts, or you're in negotiation with all of your unions, correct?
Yeah, the 9.5 does not include any contractual increases for July 1st, 2011 or on. We have two contracts right now that are actually already in place for the current year. All of our other contracts expired June 30th, 2009. So we're in contract negotiations with all unions right now, but their contracts have expired a year and a half ago.
Do you have an estimate of when you would settle, what that cost would be?
When I would what?
When those contracts are settled, what that liability would be? Ballpark, $1 million, $2 million?
What the settlement amount will be?
Right.
They're in negotiation right now.
Okay. So the 9.5 or the 5 million would be, it doesn't include significant costs. Do you have that, Mr. Moses?
He wouldn't have it because it's all in collective bargaining right now. So anything additional you don't see here, unless we get additional money for either the city or the state or the feds, it's going to drive that number up. So the key is, and without getting into collective bargaining, I think we're cognizant of what we're faced with. Very cognizant of what we're faced with.
Okay.
And also, Mr. Lee wants to speak, but that's your point's well taken. I think everybody's really well aware of what that number could do, but I really, unfortunately, can't elaborate in more detail.
Thank you. Mr. Leahy?
Thank you. I just want to, I think these meetings are important, and I think that as long as we continue to have an open dialogue, because school department's well aware of the sacrifices from our city employees too, police, fire, all its unions. But, the reality is if we don't keep this line of communication open and work on this together, we already know that our schools don't have any librarians, and we know that, over the years, I know we've talked about enrollment numbers, but to me, enrollment numbers don't mean a thing when you don't have librarians and you don't have reading teachers and you don't have the tutors that you used to have. So, we need to work on this and have an open and honest dialogue, and then we're going to have to make some hard decisions come next year.
Thank you, Mr. Leahy. If there's no other thoughts, discussion, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I didn't know if the superintendent wanted to comment at all. Give her an opportunity.
Madam Superintendent?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I just would also remind not only the council but the city of Lowell just that this will be year number 7 of cuts for the school department, and we have lost hundreds of employees, programs. We have restructured the district office, and as the city manager said, it will be very, very important as we go forward in this fiscal crisis that we really are facing, that we have open lines of communication, and that we all understand what's at risk of losing if we cut any further. Our class sizes at our middle school level were greatly increased when we closed the Rogers School, or Rogers Middle School. Our elementary K-4 level this year, we lost many of our classroom aides, and our classroom sizes have increased. With the closing of the charter school, we've increased numbers coming again into our middle schools, and our high school for the last 2 years has taken significant cuts. So as we go forward, I agree with the city manager that this is the most difficult financial year that we have faced in 7 years, and definitely the most difficult of the last 3. And we don't want to be alarmist, but at the same time, on June 30th, we don't want our school community to say, why didn't you tell us? We didn't realize the level of cuts that the school system is about to really have to look at, because as Mr. Lynch has said, we are very cognizant of the fact that the other departments are in great need too. And I'm just not sure this year how much the state can help us because their budgets are also built on this structural flaw called stimulus money, which we were all very grateful to take. But when we were making the tough calls to take that money as one-time money and use it as operational money, we knew this day would come. And we are not alone. There's 300 and some other cities and towns in the Commonwealth that are facing this financial drama. And I think towns and cities who work together like this, like we are here tonight, will be the better off at the end of this what will be a very painful process. So I encourage our school community, our community at large, to come out. This is just one of many meetings that we'll have over the next 6 months. But it will be very important that people are educated to the tough calls that the City Council and the School Committee will have to make. It's a very difficult time to be in your seat. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. If there's no other comments, entertain a motion to adjourn. By School Committee Woman Doherty, seconded by School Committee Woman Leary. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.